Welcome to the Sacred Geometry of Consciousness. For more than 33 years, your show hosts, Gregory and Gail Hogue, have been internationally known leaders in creating sacred geometric tools for expanding loving consciousness and well-being. Listen in now as they share practical applications of sacred geometry in everyday life.
Welcome and thank you for joining us. Today we're continuing on our journey to talk about the number of different ways that spirit can connect with us and how we can recognize that so that we are better receptors, we are better listeners, and more capable to take those messages and utilize the way that spirit speaks to us. And that can happen in so many different ways, and we've covered quite a lot already. And today what we are choosing to talk to you about is the techniques for divining subtle energy. And subtle energy is something that many of us aren't taught what it is, and so we're learning, each one of us in our experiences and in our practices, to recognize the messages, to recognize how we can be able to use the different ways that spirit works with us.
You know, it's interesting when I hear you say recognize, I realize it's like reconjugating, reforming something that's there in our bodies. And that's the thing. Spirit has a way of sending vibrations and information through us all the time. And when we find a particular method or technique that might help us bring those vibrations into something that's maybe a little more well-defined, a little brighter edge for us to read. And by that I mean things like pendulums can work for a lot of people, where they find that by working with a particular type of a weight on the end of a string and then setting the conditions on whether it moves clockwise or counterclockwise, you can pick up those subtle vibrations from spirit as to a yes or a no. And another form of working with divining that higher information is working with kinesiology. That's muscle testing. People often will work with something where they'll put their thumb and forefinger together and then their other thumb and forefinger through the first one, making like a double loop, and then you try to break through and you can feel the resistance going on between your fingers. Something that I developed years ago that works well for me is something called stick plating, which is used in radionics, that was developed in England, especially around the turn of the century, in the 19th century, where people would determine what the frequency should be on the radionics machine by rubbing their hand over a surface with talcum powder on their finger, a metal plate, or I found that working with a piece of paper or working with something like a stone that had been lightly ground gave me a texture, and my hand was dry enough that if I rubbed my finger in a circle on that material, it would either stick or it would slide and be no stick. And so that could, I found, give me a lot of subtle interpretations as to what spirit was trying to offer me. Now, for whatever technique that you choose, it's important to start with simple questions. I mean, really work with playing with it and having fun. So you might say, well, what should I eat today? Is it better for me to have broccoli or carrots? Should I go for a walk now or later in the day? Asking simple things that are fairly non-consequential so that you get used to working with the vibrations and feeling how they amplify in your body. And then it's just a matter of practicing it over and over and over again until you get a sense of really beginning to trust it, and then discerning, what's the right way to do it, and the questions that are being answered, and really discerning what's really makes sense and what's spirit coming through and what's my influence, because you're always influencing these things coming into your life. And this is an opportunity in picking some type of way of divining higher spirit, higher self, finding a way to do it so that you turn your mind off, so you try to step back, you make an effort to get out of the way so that you can allow what's really true for you, what would really be of the most benefit, to come through. And that's something that just takes time and discernment, and, as I said, in stepping back from your mind trying to figure out the best way to do it or the right way to do something.
I think what Gregory is really getting to is that in our normal waking consciousness, we have so many different judgments and determinations of what seems appropriate and what doesn't, or what we want and what we don't. And this is really going beyond that. Learning how to let that go and ask our bodies, for instance, or ask spirit, ask our soul, ask higher guidance, what would be the next step for me? What would be a good nutrient for me to take? And sometimes we take it so seriously that we handicap ourselves. And so when Gregory is saying play with it, be light about it, because it really isn't that consequential whether one thing or the other. Now, I think it's important when you do some of these techniques, particularly with pendulums, sometimes we get to a place in our life where there's just situations and we are at our wits' end and don't quite know whether we should go in one direction or another. And using a pendulum in situations like that is very tricky, because the ego, the more of the rational mind, is going to want to step forward and be the stronger voice. And what this is about is being able to get more into that quiet zone, that null zone, to listen without judgment, and to really understand that whatever it is that you come to, when you're really coming from that place of pure reception, is for your highest good. And it will be fine, whatever that is. So trying to use some of these techniques in a way of predicting what might happen in your life is something that I would strongly urge you not to do. And because of what I just said, because I think that different parts of our personalities get in the way. And the other part is because what we want to create in our lives is very much up to us. What will we choose to do? Even if there's something that's going on in our lives that isn't working, or something that's going on in our bodies that isn't working, the most important thing is to really learn more about what that is, and then work on all the different levels to take the appropriate steps so that you can move into the direction that really supports your well-being as well as the well-being of others.
It's very important, as Gail was starting to say, about getting into a clear space, especially a heartful space, because you connect to higher self through the heart. So it might even help to put your hands on your heart. Feel your heart move into that space where you're feeling that opening, because it's through your heart that the most clarity will come. I know when I first started working with stick plating, I had a little prayer that I said every time. If I asked questions 5 times a minute, I would say this prayer every time before I ask a question. And what my ritual prayer was, under Father, Mother, God's will and the light of Christ, I call upon the saints and masters of all ages to surround me with their wisdom and love. I ask that the information shared be true and accurate and for the highest good of all. And I would say that again and again. And I did this multiple times an hour for days, weeks, months, years. I don't know when I finally stopped saying it, but it was when it became such an inherent sense within me. It was like it moved beyond habit. It moved to a place where it was a reflex action. When I started to rub my rock or my paper, or eventually I just started rubbing my hand. And what I found, as soon as I rubbed my hand, it put me into that altered state of consciousness. I even had people that could see energy notice that when I started rubbing my hand, all of a sudden the room would be filled with light beings. There would be so many beings coming into my presence, because this was the situation I had set up through all these years of practice, that I would call upon that higher aspect of myself, all these beings of love and light, to be present and to be of service to all in the questioning that was going on, to be of service to others, to be of service to myself in the way that I could help others and grow in a loving, beautiful, conscious way.
I think it's extremely important to work with whatever your personal prayer is. It centers you, it clears you, it opens that door to be able to go beyond your normal way of doing things in that normal level of consciousness, and get into these higher levels of reception and awareness. And Gregory and I use these techniques a lot in developing our geometric products, because we're working with a creative sense of developing new tools, something that there isn't science that we can look up. We can actually look up the science afterwards and we can understand it. But when we're in the creative mode and we feel that we're being drawn to create a new tool that will support people in higher consciousness, then we work with these techniques to be able to get specific information. So one of the ways that I work it as a divining technique is I have a background in channeling. And so I get into that null space, that place in my heart, that centeredness, where I release all of what my mind wants to make up and move into a place of open-heartedness and ask from that space for information that will be of the highest good. And always bring in the higher guidance, the angels, the masters, connection with soul, so that's the presence that we're dealing with. And so Greg will have a series of questions sometimes. He'll ask questions, and I will be receiving some of the information. However, the information really needs to be precise, so we need to interact with each other. So, the way that a lot of intuitive people work is when we're really being honest with ourselves, we understand that nothing comes perfectly through one person. And so when we can work together, that's when things really start to happen in a more magical way. So I might get certain images and it doesn't totally make sense to me. And I'll say, Gregory, what are you getting? How can you now take the next level of fleshing something out? And so he will use the stick plating divining technique that he's very familiar with. It puts him into that rhythm, that connection with guidance and with soul, so that he can massage that information together with his understandings, his scientific understandings. So it's really a very, very fun process that we've used now for 34 years together and leading our lives together and building all kinds of products and tools for consciousness raising.
Another thing that is really important in getting good answers is asking good questions, because you'll get led in the direction that you're questioning. And so it's a little tricky there, because I remember once being at a show with a lot of dowsers, and there would be a dowser coming up and would look at, say, the heart companion I was showing them, and they would go, "Oh, I don't need this." And I go, "Really? Why don't you change the question that you're asking?" Because if we ask, "Do I need this?" quite often, Spirit realizes you don't need anything. You are complete, you are wonderful, you are whole in and of yourself. So if you ask if you need something, quite often the answer you get will be no, you don't need that. But if you shift that question to, will this serve me at this time? Will this support me? Will this be a tool that can make a difference in helping me open up in a certain way, or being of loving support to someone? You'll often get quite a different answer than if you simply ask, "Do I need it?" And often when in my stick plating, I'll get the feedback that it's kind of a skip stick, or I'll realize it's kind of a maybe, like I'm not really asking the question clearly. I'm not really focusing in the right direction. I may be getting close, warm. It's like playing that game. You're getting warmer, 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 or you're getting colder, colder, colder. And realize that in your questioning, you're moving toward a particular goal.
When you were talking about need versus serve, those are very two different distinct pathways that we can go down. And when we come from a place of what is it that I need? And I think whenever there's something that is up for us, where we're feeling a little out of control, something's not working, concerned, maybe there's some stress going on, or fear. When we go down that pathway of what do I need, that is, neediness is something that is not really a very healthy direction for us. And so to be able to recognize that word need as something that you want to look at and go, what really serves this situation? What serves the people involved? Service is a beautiful thing. Service is something that is it is about grace and sharing and coming from the heart and speaking truth. It is a whole different energy field than need, which comes from lack, which comes from fear. So whenever you hear yourself moving in a direction that isn't supporting the good of all, the good of whatever it is that you're choosing to move through that path in your life, come back into your heart and reframe the situation. Ask the questions in a different way. Present yourself in a different way. Recognize, what is your motive? What is the purpose of what you're asking for at a specific time? And that will lead you into a much grander appreciation and capability to connect on those deeper soul and spiritual levels.
Whoa, yes. And also realize, though, that asking for the highest good can also lead to a lot of personal house cleaning, which can be a messy process. And what I mean by that is, I had a friend once who worked with guidance very clearly. She had strong guidance. And she asked them about a particular business relationship that she wanted to enter into, a partnership. And she said, what would be for the highest good with this relationship? And her guidance said, yes, go for it. So she did, and after a really hellacious year, she finally dissolved the business relationship, and she went back to her guidance, and she had a real vengeance going, like, why did you set me up to go through this? And they said, well, you said for the highest good, and didn't you learn a lot from this experience? And wasn't that your intent, to learn, to grow, to understand? So we have to understand in working with higher guidance that even asking for the highest good, we can open ourselves up to a situation where we're learning and growing in a way that may not be the most comfortable. So if that's your intent, ask that in your questioning, but really work with everything with the understanding, as Gail was also saying, that we're here to grow and learn in consciousness. And sometimes it can be a little messy, but it isn't painful unless we choose to make it so. We really have the option of coming at things from a higher awareness and see that it's all an opportunity for expanding love, helping others and ourselves, and maybe some of those things are a little messy at times, but as long as we don't take it too personally, we can allow that love to come through and the understanding where we can make it easier and easier, the path we trod in our life, to express our experience and our love and not be feeling like we're pushed into a corner or having a lot of difficulties.
When it comes down to it, Gregory, wouldn't you say that we are creative beings? We're not just taking direction and, moving around like a robot. We are able to connect on so many different levels to create the lives that we have in these bodies. We have the soul that comes into this body. And with that, there are a gazillion different opportunities. And as we become more adept at learning about the different levels of how we can connect, we can be more and more creative, and we can develop a life that is more loving, more compassionate, more satisfying. So when it comes down to it, with everything that we do, the most important thing is coming from that center of love, as Gregory was just saying, developing more compassion, more understanding, more motivation to step forward to make a positive difference. And as we learn, as we train ourselves through our ups and downs, as we fall, we learn to pick ourselves up, and that's what's most important, is that resilience and recognizing that we are perfectly imperfect, and we will have lots of opportunities to detect what works and what doesn't work, and recognize that self-love is critical. And working on that is so important in all of these different ways that we speak about in connecting onto the higher realms of who we are.
That takes up all our time today. Have a wonderful life, and don't take it too personally.
And blessings.
Blessings.